I'd like to invite Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, Minister in the Presidency of the Government of South Africa, to come and deliver her ministerial address.
Thank you, Excellency, former President Mbeki, and all distinguished guests before me. I'd like to extend my greetings to you and really apologize. We had to weather the traffic, which was not very friendly today, amongst other commitments we had, so hopefully I didn't delay you for nothing. I wish to thank the Thabo Mbeki Foundation for the invitation to articulate South Africa's vision and commitment to shaping a more inclusive global governance system and to unpack the pivotal role of the Global South and South Africa's upcoming G20 presidency in advancing solidarity, equality, and sustainability. It is indeed an honor to be invited by an institution that is dedicated to facilitating dialogue on strategic priorities and actions for Africa's renaissance, a few days before the first ever presidency of the G20 by an African country that begins literally in the next 4 days, the 1st of December. The COVID-19 pandemic underscored the interconnectedness of the Global South and North. The growing unity and assertiveness of the Global South has amplified its role in global governance and provided a platform for reshaping global governance structures to better reflect the needs and aspirations of the world's majority. It can be said that the Global South continues to demonstrate that it is not merely a passive participant, but a transformative force in global governance, advocating for equity, inclusivity, and sustainable development in an evolving international order. I know there was a previous speaker earlier in the day who spoke about the evolving international order with the elections in the USA and other parts of the world. The influence of the Global South is arising from their collective population size, economic growth trajectories, the natural resource abundance, and evolving global alliances. Many countries in the Global South are central to global trade networks, and they are beginning to play a larger role in technology innovation, particularly in areas like fintech and renewable energy, because the youth, who are the majority of the population, are really focused in those areas. Demonstrating the emergence of the Global South in the global economy, initiatives like the New Development Bank, commonly known as the NDB, and the China's Belt and Road Initiative reflect efforts to create alternative pathways for economic development and governance bypassing traditional institutions. Being home to the majority of the world's population, representing a youthful and growing labor force, has gifted the Global South with a demographic dynamism that positions these nations as drivers of a global consumption and production in the coming decades. In addition, the Global South holds vast natural reserves of natural resources, including critical minerals, energy resources, arable land, making it central to global supply chains and energy security. Countries in the Global South are advocating for greater global representation in international institutions such as the United Nations Security Council, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Forums such as the Conference of Parties, commonly known as COP, have witnessed the Global South shaping discussions on adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage fund. It is in this context of South Africa being part of the Global South that has shaped South Africa's vision for an inclusive global governance system that reflects its commitment to creating a world that prioritizes fairness, sustainability, and cooperation. By championing reforms in international institutions, fostering African unity, and engaging in South-South cooperation, South Africa seeks to ensure that the voices of marginalized and developing nations are not only heard, but have a meaningful impact on the global stage. This is drawn from our foreign policy principles that are rooted in human rights, solidarity, and African unity, and is succinctly summarized in our objective of a better Africa and a better world. So we advocate for an inclusive global governance system that prioritizes equitable development, multilateral cooperation, and justice. South Africa has worked to reform international institutions and promote a more balanced world order. Let me give you a brief overview of what are South Africa's vision and commitments. We have a vision for an inclusive multilateralism. And South Africa envisions a global governance system that reflects the realities of the 21st century, especially the growing influence of the global South. As such, we advocate for reform of the global institutions so that we can change, in particular, representation in the United Nations Security Council, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization to better represent developing nations. We also advocate for an address of systemic inequities in trade, finance, and technology transfers that disadvantage African and other developing countries. As a prominent member of the African Union, South Africa tries to play an important role in advancing the continent's agenda on global platforms, including Agenda 2063, aligning global governance reforms with the AU's vision for a prosperous and a peaceful Africa. And there's a context that must be given to our commitment to the BRICS and the Global South. South Africa's active membership in BRICS demonstrates its commitment to strengthening South-South cooperation and through institutions like the New Development Bank. South Africa supports projects that address infrastructure and development gaps in emerging economies. The BRICS also serve as a platform for South Africa to amplify the collective voice of the Global South in global governance discussions. And the previous discussion was quite interesting because we are also proponents of climate justice and sustainability. As such, South Africa is vocal about the need for an inclusive approach to addressing climate change that considers the vulnerabilities of developing nations. And for that, our view on the just energy transition is that we want the international support for transition from coal-dependent energy systems while addressing unemployment and inequality without indebting future generations. We also are pushing for increased and accessible funding mechanisms to assist developing countries in adapting to climate impacts, including the possibility for a global climate insurance fund. On peace, security, and human rights, we continue to champion for conflict resolution and the protection and promotion of human rights. We drive this through our mediation efforts, such as South Africa's contribution to peace-building processes in Africa. I'm sure you are all familiar of our initiatives in Sudan, South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and our participation in the Africa Peace Initiative on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We are strong advocates for a fair and inclusive global systems that uphold international law and human dignity. And in this regard, South Africa's case in the International Court of Justice against Israel, based on the plight of the people of Palestine, is premised on this principle. We further promote the need for equitable trade systems that enable meaningful participation for developing nations in the global economy. And our role in the African Continental Free Trade Area seeks to leverage regional integration to enhance South Africa's or Africa's collective bargaining power in global trade. A strong bargaining power is demonstrating its bearing in our call for fair access to technology and investments that support a sustainable industrialization. Therefore, South Africa's presidency of the G20 will be informed by these principles. As a government, we consider our imminent presidency of the G20 and the hosting of its summit in 2025 not just as an honor to South Africa, but a historic opportunity for our continent to address long-standing inequities and to champion transformative policies that will benefit African people and those of the Global South in general. It was indeed befitting that the African Union attained permanent membership of the G20 before our presidency and hosting of the summit on the African soil, as this offers us an opportunity to collectively leverage the presence of our union in the G20 to champion a pan-African agenda. And therefore, what are South Africa's priorities as it relates to the G20 presidency? We have chosen a theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability for our G20 presidency. And while the high-level deliverables and priorities of our G20 presidency resonate with the agenda of the Global South and Africa in particular, we've painstakingly ensured that our G20 presidency also mirrors and contributes to the realization of our own national priorities and initiatives. So let me quickly take you through the priorities. The priority one is inclusive economic growth, industrialization, and employment and inequality. And we have identified this priority with the view of elevating and accelerating the discussion around industrialization, especially in Africa and other developing regions, focusing on special economic zones, green industries and technology, energy, food security, manufacturing, trade, logistics, and regional and global integration. The priority is also strategically aligned with our own program of action as articulated in the Medium-Term Development Plan 2024-2029 on inclusive economic growth and job creation. The realization of this priority requires an alignment of all spheres of economic policy behind the goals of achieving high employment, decent work, and inclusive economic growth through industrialization and re-industrialization in a manner that focuses on youth employment, closes the gender gap, reduces inequality, and protects the environment. During its presidency, South Africa will propose the creation of a task force on inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and inequality. The task force will provide a platform to share ideas on economic policy frameworks best suited for the individual needs of countries, while at the same time ensuring international policy coordination. This task force will build awareness and capacity of developing countries in areas of, one, measuring labor underutilization, assessing national budgets with a view to better promote employment, industrial and investment policies to boost productivity in manufacturing and services, including the green, digital, and care sectors that can abet inclusive and just transitions, and to reduce infrastructure gaps and bottlenecks, increase productivity in agriculture and agro-processing, and regional trade integration, and gender and age-sensitive macro policy inclusion, and also for domestic and regional financing with a special emphasis on investment. Our priority two is on food security. Reports from institutions such as the Food Agricultural Organization, the World Food Programme, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and the United Nations Children's Fund and the World Health Organization paint a very disturbing picture of a state of global hunger. Reports released by these organizations in July 2024 placed the number of people who faced hunger globally at 733 million. Africa continues to register negative food security trends in these reports, with 2024 being the 5th consecutive year of rising food insecurity on the continent. The number of Africans classified as food-stressed increased by 11 million to a record high of 225 million in 2024. Sub-Saharan Africa's continued reliance on subsistence farming and food imports makes the continent susceptible to a combination of global and local factors such as extreme weather conditions, economic shocks, and conflict. We have equally linked the food security issue with our own program of action, and food security falls squarely within the ambit of South Africa's own priority number 2 of the Medium-Term Development Plan 2024-2029 on reduction of poverty and tackling the high cost of living. Among other outcomes, the government has committed itself to ensuring an effective, integrated, and comprehensive poverty alleviation strategy aimed at lifting the most vulnerable out of poverty. During our G20 presidency, we proposed the establishment of a task force on food security. This task force will look at food security and systems under regional and global pillars. Under the regional pillar, it is envisaged that the G20 could task the Food and Agricultural Organization to monitor, provide technical advice, and encourage regional approaches to resilience in food systems, such as water, energy, infrastructure, trade, and climate change. Under the global pillar, the task force would embark on initiatives to address the drivers of food insecurity due to speculative activities, market concentration, and barriers related to food trading systems. Government of South Africa is currently considering a strategy to prevent food waste or food loss. The priority number 3 for the G20 South Africa 2025 is artificial intelligence and innovation for sustainable development. And this artificial intelligence features very strongly in the 19th G20 Summit Leaders Declaration from Brazil. The declaration emphasized that AI progress brings greater opportunities for development within the framework of the digital economy, and that technology requires a responsible approach to ensure its ethical and human-centered implementation. In this regard, the declaration highlights the importance of establishing safeguards to uphold human rights, promotion of AI governance, and the need for human supervision and appropriate regulation. This will ensure alignment of technological development with human values. South Africa has noted all these issues that they impact some of her priorities, especially those pertaining to inclusive economic growth and job creation, as AI will impact the world of work and the emergence of the digital economy in South Africa. Consequently, South Africa proposes that during its presidency of the G20, a task force on artificial intelligence be established to play a crucial role in aligning Africa's strategic priorities with the broader global agenda, ensuring that regional perspectives and needs are integrated in the international discourse on AI governance. We are strongly considering legacy projects around AI as a country. And on the G20 after 20 years, because the G20 that we are going to be in is 20 years, is the 20th summit, a reflection on key achievements and the way forward, we are proposing that we must have a comprehensive review of the work of the G20. The review will identify proposals to strengthen consensus building through the holding of joint working groups on cross-cutting issues, strengthening the participation of underrepresented regions in the G20 discussions, and convening G20 working groups meeting at lower cost and facilitate more engagement by technical experts. But at the 19th G20, as we accepted and took over the presidency of the G20, towards the declaration where there was moves to try not to agree on certain aspects of the declaration, South Africa, we invoked and proposed the adoption of what is known in South Africa, which was adopted during our own CODESA and constitutional negotiations, of sufficient consensus. And this work on the reflection and key achievements and way forward, we want to propose that instead of a consensus, we should, as a G20, agree on sufficient consensus and introduce that terminology of sufficient consensus in bodies where decisions where majority are agreeing and only one party disagreeing were dropped in critical matters that affected the global south. And therefore, South Africa plans to open up these engagements to also include civil society and continuing on the trend of Brazil of the G20 Social. And that will be held, an event that will precede the Leaders Summit and will bring together representatives of the existing engagement groups and other segments of civil society that may offer meaningful contributions to the G20. And as a country, we are looking forward to the contribution of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation in this G20 Social, so that we can then use the convening power of this foundation to drive engagements and sustainability of the contribution of ordinary members in the G20 and the legacy projects therefore. For us, the world, or at least part of it, has been subjected to elements of global governance for a few centuries now, with the various empires that have ruled at different times imposing elements of global governance, some of which doctrinally survive to this day. The Second World War, for example, and the outcomes thereof have given the world much of what obtains today as the prime institutions and systems of global governance. However, that period is vastly and materially different from the world of today. Many countries of the South were colonies at the time, and this was notably the case in Africa. And the countries that were defeated during that war were largely marginalized or contained as a measure of preventing them from becoming a threat to global peace and security. They were arguably co-opted into the global institutions and systems of governance later, but importantly within the prism of the Cold War that largely defined global affairs after the Second World War. There are several forces now with a strategic motive that have since come to the fore. Much of the colonial world has been liberated. Climate change is a global challenge that poses an existential threat to humanity. Demographic changes in the population of the world and the inherent migration patterns underpinning it have changed markedly. The dizzying speed of evolution of technologies, notably artificial intelligence, machine learning, bring about it in almost equal measures opportunities and risk. The deep sea and the deep space areas of inquiry and exploitation that require progressive and equitable global governance, non-state actors often play a role equal to or even bigger than state actors, including terrorist networks and transnational criminal syndicates, and the capacity of a few countries to take and effect decisions across the world, including outside the context of the established institution of global governance. This obviously an evolution at some level of the naval blockade imposed on France towards the end of the 18th century. Without a doubt, the current architecture has prejudiced the countries of the South more than the countries of the North. The scope of issues that are covered or require global governance is very wide and affects almost every facet of humanity. And the question is, what do we do with it as the global South, but what do we do with it as South Africa, given the opportunity to lead the G20, and that's what will define our presidency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll move into our next session, urban